Welcome to the Deep Dive. We are so glad you could join us today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
If you are balancing 100 different things right now, maybe you're commuting or, prepping for a meeting, or maybe you just have an insane curiosity about how the world actually works, you are in the right place.
Yeah, you want to stay informed. You want that quick but thorough aha moment to take with you into your day.
Exactly. But you absolutely do not want the crushing information overload that usually comes with trying to learn something new.
Right.
So that's our job. We do the heavy lifting, sifting through the sources and the noise so you can get right to the good stuff.
That is the goal. We are here to extract the most critical insights from the material, look at the underlying architecture of the information, and hopefully leave you with a fresh, practical perspective on how things operate behind the scenes.
And today we have a really fascinating blueprint to examine. We are pulling our insights from a Wikipedia article detailing a very specific advocacy campaign run by Greenpeace USA.
Project Hot Seat.
Right. It's called Project Hot Seat. Our mission for this deep dive is to deconstruct this campaign, to understand the actual physical mechanics of advocacy. We want to look closely at how a grassroots group attempts to take raw, on-the-ground, passionate energy and translate it into a structured, viable political force. I mean, how do you go from a group of people deeply caring about an issue to actually moving the needle in the halls of power?
Before we get into the granular details of how they did this, it is vital to establish some clear parameters for our discussion today.
Oh, for sure.
The source material we're examining deals heavily with political advocacy and environmental policy. However, our objective for you in this deep dive is strictly analytical and educational.
Right.
We are here to break down the campaign's mechanics, its tactical choices, and its stated goals as a case study in understanding political strategy. We are not taking sides, we're not endorsing these specific viewpoints, and we are not here to debate the underlying environmental science or the policies themselves. We are simply putting this specific campaign blueprint under the microscope to see how the gears of this type of political machinery were designed to turn.
Think of it like looking at the structural blueprints of a building. We are studying the architecture, the load-bearing walls of the campaign strategy, not judging the furniture they decided to put inside.
That's a great way to put it.
So, setting the stage here, Project Hot Seat, which is often abbreviated as PHS in our source material, was founded in the year 2006.
Right.
And the foundational purpose of this campaign was to pressure members of Congress to implement policies that would cut greenhouse gas emissions.
Yeah.
But they didn't just walk into Washington with a vague cardboard sign saying, do better for the planet.
They did not. Which brings us to the first crucial lesson in the architecture of advocacy. Vague demands yield vague results.
Always.
If you want to effectively pressure a politician, or anyone for that matter, you have to give them a specific threshold to meet. It has to be something that can be strictly measured and verified.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the source outlines a three-pronged attack. Project Hot Seat demanded three highly specific policy goals.
Very specific.
First, they wanted a national cap-and-trade system. Second, they demanded a national renewable energy standard of at least 20% by the year 2020. And third, they wanted an increase in average fuel economy to 40 miles per gallon.
Right.
But let's pause on that first one, though. For those of us who aren't economists, and just based on how this is framed in our source as a tool to cut emissions, what exactly is the mechanism of a cap-and-trade system?
Essentially, it's an economic framework. Without getting bogged down in external economic theory, the basic concept derived from the name itself is twofold.
Okay.
The cap is a strict, legally mandated limit on the total amount of greenhouse gases that can be emitted globally or nationally. That creates a ceiling.
A hard ceiling.
Right. The trade part creates a market. If a company emits less than their allowed limit, they can trade or sell their leftover allowance to a company that is struggling to stay under the limit. It turns emission reductions into a financial incentive rather than just a moral plea.
Got it. So they are demanding a very specific economic structure, not just a general please pollute less guideline.
Exactly.
And that rigidity carries over to the other two goals.
What's fascinating here is the absolute rigidity of those numbers across the board. Let's look at the psychology and the strategy behind that.
Yeah, let's do that.
When an advocacy group leans on messaging about saving the earth or protecting the environment, it is incredibly easy for a politician to nod along, smile for the camera, say they wholeheartedly agree with the sentiment.
And then do absolutely nothing of legislative substance.
Exactly. It's too abstract to be actionable. But look at these three goals from Project Hot Seat. They are undeniably concrete.
Take that fuel economy goal, an average of 40 miles per gallon. They didn't say, we need cars to be way more efficient in the future. They gave a hard, undeniable number, 40 mpg.
It serves as a psychological anchor. A number like 40 miles per gallon is instantly recognizable to the average citizen. You see it on the dashboard of your car every single day.
Right, it's right in front of you.
The campaign essentially took a massive abstract planetary issue like greenhouse gas emissions and shrank it down to a metric that a voter interacts with during their morning commute.
That is so smart.
It gives the campaign a razor-sharp focus. If a politician supports a bill that only aims for 35 miles per gallon, the campaign can point to their clipboard and say, no, you failed the test. The standard we demanded is 40. It creates a pass-or-fail grading system for legislative support.
And then there is a Renewable Energy Standard. The demand was at least 20% by 2020. Again, just looking at the communication strategy of that, 20 by 2020 is practically a mnemonic device. It rolls right off the tongue. It's catchy.
It is catchy, but more importantly, it pairs a rigid percentage with a specific target year. The strategy there is entirely about creating a countdown clock.
Ticking away.
Right. It forces a manufactured sense of urgency. You aren't just asking for more renewable energy at some point in the undefined future. You are drawing a hard line in the sand on the calendar.
I see.
This combination of goals, a specific economic system, a specific percentage tied to a specific year, and a specific efficiency metric provides an incredibly sturdy scaffolding for the whole operation.
It sets the rules of the game.
Exactly. It tells the volunteers on the ground exactly what they're fighting for, and it tells the politicians exactly what is expected of them to earn their support.
It really is the difference between a vague New Year's resolution to get in shape and a specific actionable goal to run a 10-kilometer race by October 1st. One is a wish, the other is a plan.
A very clear plan.
But having a brilliant plan on paper is only half the battle. You have to get people to actually pay attention to the plan. You have to force the politicians to look at those specific numbers.
Which is incredibly difficult.
It is. And that brings us to the boots-on-the-ground activities of Project Hot Seat. Here's where it gets really interesting.
Oh, the stunts.
Yes, the stunts. They didn't just sit in boardrooms writing dry policy papers. They orchestrated some highly visual, highly localized physical stunts to raise global warming awareness.
This is where the theory of those rigid goals meets the harsh reality of public attention. In the modern media landscape, simply having a good, mathematically sound policy proposal is rarely enough to break through the noise of the daily news cycle.
Nobody's going to read a white paper on the evening news.
Exactly. You need a hook. You need a spectacle that forces a viewer to stop scrolling or stop flipping channels and actually look at you.
The source text highlights something called the International Day of Action, with the most recent one noted in the article occurring on December 8th, 2007. Volunteers were organizing rallies and outreach events all over. But the specific details of these events are what really stand out.
They do.
In one instance, 25 people took a polar bear swim in the freezing waters of Puget Sound. Now, I complain when my car heater takes more than 2 minutes to warm up, so the idea of willingly jumping into Puget Sound in December is mind-boggling to me. That alone proves they were serious.
It proves they were serious, and it operates as a very specific kind of psychological signaling. Think about the mechanics of jumping into freezing water. It is extremely uncomfortable.
Painful, even.
Right, and that severe discomfort is entirely the point. When you plunge into icy water for a cause, you are signaling to the public and to politicians that your level of commitment is incredibly high.
You're literally putting your body on the line.
You aren't just casually clicking an online petition from the comfort of your living room sofa. You are physically enduring bodily hardship to make your point. It adds a layer of undeniable, visceral human passion to the cold, hard numbers of their policy goals.
They also organized a massive event in Florida. 300 participants gathered on a beach and used their actual physical bodies to spell out the words, "Save our state."
A massive undertaking.
But I have to ask, why go through the logistical nightmare of coordinating 300 people to lie down in the sand in specific letter formations? I mean, you have to deal with the tide. You probably have someone yelling through a megaphone trying to get people to form a legible letter S. Wouldn't it be infinitely easier to just hand 300 people some cardboard signs and have them stand in a group?
Easier, yes, absolutely. But holding signs is expected. We walk past people holding signs on street corners all the time, and we barely even register it.
That's true. It just kind of blurs together.
It blends into the background of civic life. A human banner, however, creates a completely different image. It is a spectacle designed specifically for the camera, usually from an aerial or drone view. It literally transforms individual protesters into a single massive piece of communication.
So they're basically hacking the media cycle.
Precisely that.
Yeah.
It is a creative shortcut to grab the public's attention, and by extension, the local news media's attention. A standard rally with people chanting and holding signs might get a 5-second mention on the evening news if they are lucky.
If it's a slow news day.
Right. But aerial footage of 300 bodies spelling a giant message on a beach. That is a compelling visual that broadcast producers simply cannot resist putting on the screen.
But it's so strange to me that a group willing to jump into freezing water and organize massive human aerial art is also engaging in incredibly mundane bureaucratic tasks. The source notes that Project Hot Seat members were also collecting postcards to send to Congress.
Postcards?
Yeah, it feels like two completely different campaigns. On one hand, you have these flashy avant-garde visual stunts, and on the other, you have volunteers sitting around licking stamps for postcards to flood the mailrooms of the politicians they're trying to influence.
That juxtaposition might seem strange, but that combination is the absolute hallmark of a highly structured advocacy campaign. You have to view them as two necessary halves of an engine.
Okay, how so?
The visual stunts, the bodily art on the beach, the freezing swims, those generate the heat. They generate the headline awareness, the viral images, and the public emotion. But emotion alone doesn't actually change policy in Washington.
Right, politicians can just ignore a picture of a beach.
They can. And that is where the postcards come in. The postcards represent the friction. That is the physical mechanism for applying that newly generated heat directly onto the desks of the lawmakers.
Literally onto their desks.
Yes. 1,000 emails can be deleted by an intern with a single click. 1,000 physical postcards require a mail bin. They physically take up space in a politician's office. The human banner gets you on the evening news. The mountain of heavy cardstock reminds the politician that the people they saw on the news are also their constituents who vote in their district.
That makes perfect sense. They're capturing the energy from the stunts and funneling it into the mailroom. And that transitions us into how this group actually engaged with the legislative process.
Right, the actual lawmaking.
Because Project Hot Seat wasn't just protesting it to the void and hoping someone would write a bill. In 2006, the source explicitly states they supported Henry Waxman's Safe Climate Act. They attached all of that grassroots energy, all those postcards, to a specific piece of legislation.
This is a critical milestone for any advocacy group's life cycle. It is the evolution from being an outside agitator complaining about a problem to being an active participant in the legislative solution.
It's focusing the laser.
Exactly. By backing a specific bill, like the Safe Climate Act, they were essentially handing their supporters a map and saying, here is the vehicle that carries our specific goals. This is exactly where we apply all the pressure we've been building.
And this brings up a really defining quote from the source material. A figure named Phil Radford is quoted as saying that this kind of organizing is key to making the environmental movement into a viable political force in Congress and around the country.
A viable political force.
Right. So what does this all mean? When he uses the phrase viable political force, what is the actual translation of that in the context of this campaign?
To become a viable political force means making the transition from being easily dismissible to being undeniably consequential. A lot of movements generate a tremendous amount of noise, but a viable political force generates actual consequences for lawmakers.
Consequences, right.
Radford is articulating the core underlying philosophy of Project Hot Seat. You combine the hyper-specific policy goals, the 20% by 2020 of the 40 MPG, with the grassroots spectacles, the human banners, and the polar plunges.
The heat.
The heat. And you channel all of that generated heat directly at Congress through legislative support and targeted postcard campaigns. That's the friction. When a movement can reliably and repeatedly mobilize its base to exert that kind of coordinated physical pressure, politicians are forced to calculate the actual political cost of ignoring them.
It changes the math for the politician.
That is when you transition into a viable political force. You become a mathematical factor in their political survival.
But the architecture of a campaign, even a highly structured one, is rarely permanent. Our source text provides a really fascinating conclusion to the timeline of Project Hot Seat. It says that in 2009, Project Hot Seat was renamed.
It became Climate Rescue.
Exactly, Climate Rescue. The campaign itself didn't end, the machinery kept going, but its public identity fundamentally shifted.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, This rebranding from Project Hot Seat to climate rescue is a profound study in the evolution of framing and human psychology. Words matter immensely in advocacy because they dictate how the public emotionally interacts with your campaign.
Let's analyze the psychological shift between those two specific names. Let's look at Project Hot Seat first. Just saying it out loud, it inherently sounds combative.
Very aggressive.
The metaphor of putting someone in the hot seat is entirely about applying pressure, interrogation, and intentionally making a person sweat. It is a name hyper-focused on the aggressive tactic of cornering politicians.
It centers the politician as the primary target of the narrative. It tells the volunteer, we are going to fight these lawmakers. But climate rescue completely changes that framing.
It really does.
The word rescue implies a dire emergency, a crisis that requires immediate heroic intervention. It shifts the focus entirely away from the combative partisan tactic of pressuring a lawmaker and centers the narrative purely on the issue itself.
It sounds significantly less like a gritty political lobbying effort and a lot more like a unified emergency operation. If you ask someone to join a rescue, you are asking them to be a hero.
That is the psychological key. And this type of evolution is incredibly common in long-term advocacy work. As the public awareness of an issue grows and matures, the branding often shifts from the mechanics of the fight, putting people in the hot seat, to the urgency of the solution, the rescue.
It opens the door for more people to join.
It dramatically broadens the appeal. A normal citizen might be very hesitant to join a combative, aggressive political pressure campaign because it sounds exhausting. But they might be very willing to join a rescue mission because it sounds vital and necessary.
Even if they're doing the exact same tasks.
Exactly. The tactical machinery underneath might remain exactly the same. They still have the specific goals, they still do the visual stunts, they still send the postcards. But the outward-facing psychological framing is entirely reinvented to reduce human fatigue.
So, synthesizing all of this for you, the listener, why should you care about a short Wikipedia article summarizing an environmental campaign from the mid-2000s?
It's a fair question.
Because dissecting Project Hot Seat gives us a perfect miniature blueprint of how modern advocacy is actually structured to manipulate attention and policy. If you ever want to understand how a group tried to move the needle on a massive issue in your own life, just look for these foundational elements.
They're always there.
First, they set hyper-specific numerical goals like 40 miles per gallon so they have a measurable pass or fail benchmark. Second, they generate localized, highly visual stunts like spelling words with 300 bodies on a beach or jumping into freezing water to completely hack the media attention cycle.
Generate the heat.
Third, they take all that generated heat and apply it directly to Congress by supporting specific legislation, creating friction with things like postcards. And finally, they constantly evolve their branding, shifting their language to meet the psychological moment, moving from the aggressive pressure of a hot seat to the heroic urgency of a rescue.
It is a fascinating masterclass in the mechanics of political pressure.
It truly is a comprehensive blueprint for how to build a movement from the ground up.
But before we wrap up today, this raises an important question, something for you to mull over long after this deep dive ends. Let's look back at one of their foundational demands that gave them so much focus.
Okay.
A national renewable energy standard of at least 20% by the year 2020. Based strictly on the architecture of that strategy, what happens to a political campaign when its foundational, time-stamped goals cross paths with the actual unstoppable march of time?
Oh, that is a really compelling thought, because they tethered their whole identity to a calendar year.
They did. When you build your entire rallying cry, your mnemonic devices, and your countdown clocks around a specific year, like 2020, what is the internal mechanism for an advocacy group when that midnight inevitably strikes?
Do they just pack it up?
Do the highly specific numbers that once gave the campaign its fierce, undeniable focus suddenly become massive liabilities if the goals aren't met? Or do they simply cross out the old year on the whiteboard, write in a new one, and print new postcards?
That's the question.
It forces us to deeply consider how advocacy groups must constantly, endlessly reinvent their own hot seats as their deadlines arrive, proving that in the world of political momentum, the finish line is almost always a mirage that just gets moved further down the road.
That is a brilliant point to leave on, and a perfect reminder that the architecture of advocacy is never really finished. It is just constantly under renovation. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive.
It was a pleasure.
We hope we gave you that aha moment you were looking for and a brand new lens through which to view the news, the stunts, and the campaigns happening around you every single day.
Thank you for your time, and your curiosity. Keep questioning the structure and the strategy of the information around you.
We will catch you on the next one. Take care.